Hey, it's Kay. And this is Skittles, master of all four elements. And these boys right here, well, this is Brian Big Boy Knitzko and Michael Tortellini DiMartino, the creators of Avatar. Following the success of The Last Airbender, Brian and Michael set out to create a more mature follow-up series that would introduce nuanced political themes. The only problem is, Mike and Brian don't understand political ideologies. Here we are, Book 4. We've come a long way, and we've learned a lot from our wise showrunners, Mike and Brian. We've learned that communism is bad, because communists are all just faking it to gain power. We've learned that environmentalism is silly, because all those tree-hugging hippies are just gonna turn into kaijus and wreck the city when you're not looking. And we've learned that anarchy is dangerous, because it only plunges society into chaos. And in Book 4, we learn that the very chaos caused by anarchy creates a power vacuum that will be filled by fascism. It isn't capitalism in decline, it isn't weaponizing fear or bigoted sentiments that makes fascism. It was those darn anarchists all along. So we've learned most of the ideological alternatives to neoliberal capitalism are bad, and we shouldn't try to do them. Now, to just sit back and watch the boys go over what I'm sure most of us already know, fascism is bad, and we shouldn't try to do it. Right, guys? Huh?
I mean, Kuvira might be a power-crazed dictator, but at least she spent the last few years working hard to make the Earth Kingdom somewhat better.
Oh boy. Following the assassination of the Earth Queen, the Earth Kingdom has descended into chaos. Hordes of bandits rove the lands, and all but the most defensible cities, such as Zaofu, seem to be completely at their mercy. When our antagonist, Kuvira, arrives, it is as a hero, a protector, the Great Uniter. She is pushing back the barbarian hordes and defending her people. We quickly learn this comes at the cost of submission to her rule, and that is meant to be enough to establish her as bad. But let's dig a little deeper. Who are these bandits? The nation is deeply impoverished, so we can assume they're mostly stealing for survival. However, these bandits, while pillaging for food and basic resources, also have access to planes? Who are these people? Where are they all living? What's their story? The show never really concerns itself with those sorts of questions. What's more, back in Book 3, long before the death of the Earth Queen, Korra and the gang run into this Mad Max bandit crew. The fact that there are literal road warriors outside of the walls of the city is something that's not really brought up again. That's not really questioned or explored. Their parting words to Korra were this:
"You're on the wrong side of this fight, Avatar! That gold belongs to the people, not the Queen!"
We never really learn what that means. We might assume the poverty plaguing the Earth Kingdom is turning its citizens to crime, but they don't really get that kind of sympathy. They're not afforded understanding for why they're resorting to banditry. They are simply the threat. And nobody even mentions this threat until the fascists come along. So, fascists. Fascism justifies itself as an answer to a threat. Maybe it's communists, maybe it's immigrants. Whatever it is, they're coming to get you. They're going to destroy your way of life. They are the reason you're poor. They are what's wrong with the world today. Kuvira uses the ever-present threat of these masses of bandits to force Earth Kingdom leaders to bend the knee. As she controls superior military might, only she can save them from the threat. Here's where the boys go wrong, though. When fascists say that the Jews control the banks or that Muslims are coming to instate Sharia law, whatever that is, that the bad people are going to do the bad thing, they're lying. It isn't true. The threat is a fabrication. That's the point. Fascists are liars. What the boys have done is recreate this dynamic. A fascist leader using an impending threat to seize power, but they've made the threat real. They made the justification for fascism actually a valid concern. The Jews were never going to take over Germany. Muslims aren't going to establish a caliphate in Europe. But the bandit hordes are real. The barbarians actually are at the gates. Despite going to great lengths to ensure that we understand why Kuvira does what she does, the way the boys never explore who the bandits are or why they're doing what they do, the way they use them as a faceless, unsympathetic threat to make it look like Kuvira has a point or is doing good things, even if her methods are a bit extreme. That's deeply fucking concerning. Which brings us to the worst scene of the entire series.
What did Amon want? Equality for all. Unalak? He brought back the spirits. And Zahir believed in freedom.
I guess.
The problem was, those guys were totally out of balance, and they took their ideologies too far.
This scene does two main things that we should think about. First of all, it misrepresents what the shortcomings of these three antagonists were. Toph presents them all as people who had fundamentally good ideas, but just went too far. But that's not really what happened, is it? Amon didn't go too far in pursuit of equality. He never actually cared about equality. Unalak didn't go too far to bring back the spirits. He was only ever using the whole spiritual guru shtick as a means to become the,
Dark Avatar.
Zahir didn't go too far for freedom. His plan just didn't work because it was naive and poorly thought out. When Korra tells him his actions led to Kuvira's rise to power, he has nothing to say for himself. He looks a bit shocked and embarrassed, to be honest. So where the hell did this, oh, they have good ideas but they went too far narrative come from all of a sudden? Well, that brings us to the second problem with this scene. They're setting up the idea that Korra's enemies are people who are trying to do the right thing, but their methods are just a bit extreme, because that's how they want you to think about Kuvira. Her actions are repeatedly justified. Her intentions are always portrayed as honest and for the good of her people, who she cares about and wants to protect. I feel like we've heard that kind of rhetoric before, somewhere. This would have been a great opportunity to highlight how these talking points from fascists are disingenuous, but instead, this remains a redeeming character trait for Kuvira. Fundamentally, Kuvira's heart is shown to be in the right place. She's just taking things too far. At one point, she makes the decision to sacrifice her fiancé to secure victory. Now, it doesn't work, but her decision to do so, it's not painted as madness or becoming overcome by greed or desperation. It's painted as determination. Being determined, unshakable, and willing to do whatever it takes to achieve your goals, those are traits that we tend to respect in our society. For many other villains, this would be a fall from grace. This would be the moment they go too far. For Kuvira, it only bolsters her resolve, and therefore bolsters our belief in her integrity as a character. Here's the thing about all that, though. She's a fucking Nazi! Dave, Brian, are you shitting me right now? Are you in my home, shitting directly on me?
Okay, point taken.
Kuvira is shipping off dissidents, as well as people who are not ethnically Earth Nation, to concentration camps. She is literally building an empire by way of military force and purging the undesirables. What would compel you to make her a determined badass? She made President Raiko pardon known terrorist Varric so that she can use him to develop a superweapon, an unstable, destructive force that can turn the tide of the war at the expense of the environment which they ruthlessly plunder for its production. It's nukes. Let's talk about Varric for a minute. Historically, fascist regimes have enjoyed substantial support from capitalists and the companies that they own. IBM supplied the Nazis with the sorting system that they used to identify Jews and other groups targeted by the Holocaust in their census data. Ferdinand Porsche, founder of Porsche, worked under Hitler to create Volkswagen, which would go on to use concentration camp slave labor to build civilian and military vehicles for the Nazis. Volkswagen even went on to construct a concentration camp. Hugo Boss was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party before Hitler even took power and designed their uniforms. Henry Ford supported the Nazi war machine and was awarded the highest honor a foreigner could receive in Nazi Germany. There is a long-standing marriage between fascism and capital. And for a lot of extremely wealthy people out there, war and genocide are good for business. That's a dark fucking thing to have to contend with. And it should raise some very serious questions about the current economic order. So how do the boys handle this? Well, they bend over backwards to absolve wealthy capitalists of any guilt. Varric, while developing the previously mentioned weapon of mass destruction for Kuvira, has a sudden change of heart that, even by his own admission, is completely out of nowhere.
I know, it's not like me, right? Usually I look at a project like this and all I think is, wow, I can make a ton of money off this! But recently I've been having these strange feelings. Inside. It's like I'm concerned with others. And there's this nagging voice in my head constantly, telling me what's right from wrong.
I believe that voice is your conscience, sir.
The man who helped instigate a civil war so that he could sell arms to both sides. The man who staged terrorist attacks and tried to kidnap the president. All of a sudden he says, wait a minute, this all seems immoral. This is all in service of making a key assertion. War and imperialism are bad when fascists do it. Implicit in this is the suggestion that it's less severe when done by a regular capitalist nation. But Varric is the mythical genius inventor-industrialist. He is the most idealized version of the Henry Fords and the Ferdinand Porsches of the world. And they wouldn't have thought twice. In fact, they didn't think twice. They further rehabilitate Varric's image by dropping in a little line where he says that he actually owned the building he blew up in Book 2. So it's fine then. One of the final scenes in the last episode is his heartwarming wedding. This man is a war criminal, but we're meant to ignore all of that because he eventually decided to stop being a Nazi collaborator once he'd already massively supported them, of course. Asami's father is also redeemed this season, heroically sacrificing himself so that the gang can take down Kuvira's ridiculous giant mech. The boys want us to know these are the good capitalists, even though both of them have done terrible things and their real-world counterparts would have, without question, been on Kuvira's side in this conflict.
But recently I've been having these strange feelings. Inside. It's like I'm concerned with others. And there's this nagging voice in my head constantly, telling me what's right from wrong.
When Varric has his change of heart, he is threatened by Kuvira and forced to continue working for her. This is just another way in which the boys shift all responsibility from capitalists onto individual fascist leaders. Even though the show itself tells us she was only able to get to this point with the support of Varric and several other extremely wealthy people from Zaofu, the most gentrified place on Earth. But it's more than just conveniently writing Varric out of being responsible for Kuvira's rise to power. It's part of a wider and extremely dangerous narrative about the Nazis that you've probably heard before. This is perhaps best exemplified by Bolin.
Maybe you need to spend some time in a re-education camp.
I thought that's where we send people to learn new trade skills.
The people supporting the Nazis, the people running the camps, making the weapons, pulling the triggers, they're just innocent, naive souls who were either duped by the brilliant charisma of, this guy apparently, or they were threatened. This narrative serves a very clear purpose: to absolve society. To absolve the business owners, the media outlets, and even the people on the ground who actively supported the Holocaust. It washes all of that away so that we can imagine what the Nazis did as some one-off accident that just happened because of Hitler and a few of his high-ranking allies. It reduces one of the greatest atrocities in human history to just the work of a few individuals. After all, the men pulling the trigger, well, they were just following orders, right? The way we as a culture grapple with and rationalize these atrocities is often to turn them into these absurd caricatures, into impossible evils that could not conceivably be replicated. What's far harder to accept is that these were fairly normal people, and given the right conditions, it could happen again. There's a very good video by 3 Arrows that I'll put in the description. It goes over how the psychological profiles of top Nazi officials do not paint a portrait of twisted, insane men, but of normal, fairly healthy dudes. And that's hard to reconcile with our image of Nazis as almost comic book villains. Speaking with narratives about the Nazis, earlier while discussing Henry Ford's Nazi collaboration, I used a phrase you've probably heard before, the Nazi war machine. War machine. It brings to mind an image of an advanced, mechanized army rolling over technologically inferior enemies. And the boys eagerly display that image through Kuvira's army. Experimental new weapons, legions of mechs and tanks, and even the world's ugliest Gundam. The only problem is that's not true. Actually, it's just straight up Nazi propaganda, which we parrot as fact in the West. Hitler was famously anti-science and anti-intellectual. Any advances made under the Nazis were made in spite of their leadership, not because of it. But their so-called war machine was anything but. The Nazi ground army was 90% foot-borne, with horse-drawn artillery. While the Tiger was an impressive tank to be sure, it was notoriously unreliable and prone to mechanical issues, as well as massively fuel inefficient, and fuel was something the Germans sorely lacked. While a Tiger was a much more formidable machine than an American Sherman, the Americans produced 49,000 Shermans to the Germans' 1,300 Tigers. While the Germans were developing ridiculous weapons like the rail-bound Schwerer Gustav that Kuvira's WMD prototype is based on, which barely saw use in the war at all because of the amount of time it takes to assemble it and prepare it for use. The mythologizing of the Nazis as these hyper-efficient and technologically superior masterminds, it's a gross bastardization of history that only serves to make Nazis seem cool, instead of ridiculous and destructive. Unfortunately, the boys went with making the Nazis seem cool. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the lengths that they go to make Kuvira justified and sympathetic is how the boys shut down the alternatives.
Shouldn't you be getting ready to, I don't know, rule the whole nation?
Now, don't get yourself in a tizzy. I'll have ministers for all that. No sir, Mako. When we get to Ba Sing Se, it'll just be 2 kooky pals living the life.
The United Republic intends to send their own advisors when he takes the throne in the Earth Kingdom. Wu makes it clear that he's perfectly happy to let these advisors run things, making him effectively a puppet ruler. We already know how terrible a monarch can be, but a monarch serving as a puppet for a capitalist colony, it's not an attractive alternative. And we've already spent entire seasons demonstrating that communists and anarchists aren't serious contenders. So what does that leave other than fascism or banditry? How convenient. There is no point in Book 4 where the audience is led to believe that Wu would do a better job than Kuvira. The local leaders she steamrolls are always hapless and weak. Every other option has been systematically removed. We discussed briefly in the Book 2 video how the boys gloss over some of the more inconvenient aspects of the United Republic being a colony on Earth Kingdom land. But now that we've arrived at the end of the series, you might have noticed something curious. The only people who ever really identify the United Republic as a colony are the Earth Queen and Kuvira. They are antagonists, and their issue with the colony stems from wanting to control that land themselves, not any notion of self-determination for an occupied people. Here's where we get into the misunderstanding at the heart of Book 4. The boys cannot differentiate between the nationalism of the oppressed and that of the oppressor. Kuvira plays 2 opposite roles at once, channeling the nationalism of the oppressor nation, greedily taking land by force to make themselves stronger, and the nationalism of the oppressed nation, pushing back against colonization, resisting the domination of another people. The boys don't differentiate at all between the hypernationalist expansionism of fascism and the national liberation of colonized peoples. The United Republic is a colony. Kuvira is right to have a problem with the Fire Nation invading her home, putting her people in camps, and later declaring part of the land they took as an independent nation. But because the boys never engage with the realities of colonization and with the problems that exist in the real-world parallels of the United Republic, such as the colonized peoples being murdered by the millions, Kuvira's attack on the colony comes off as just another bout of expansionist aggression from the Nazis. Despite being a genocidal fascist rolling over the nation with an army of tanks, putting her enemies in camps, Kuvira still manages to be the most well-written, sympathetic antagonist yet. There is never any doubt that she genuinely wants what's best for her people.
I was trying to help my people. Sue turned her back on the Earth Kingdom. You were gone. I had to do something.
Kuvira's been purging states of anyone who's not of Earth Kingdom origin and locking them up.
Don't pretend you know what it felt like. The Avatar is adored by millions. I was cast aside by my own parents like I meant nothing to them. How could I just stand by and watch the same thing happen to my nation when it needed someone to guide it?
I know what happens to cities who don't want to hand over control to you.
Then you know what's coming for Zalfu.
You wanted to create a place where you and your people would never be vulnerable again. I may not have been an orphan, but believe me, I understand what it feels like to be afraid.
She's a fucking Nazi.
So, how is the crisis in the Earth Kingdom resolved? After everything he's witnessed, Wu decides to implement democracy in the Earth Kingdom. After all, as we all know, democracy never comes as a result of the people struggling against oppressive rulers. It comes when one of those rulers decides to be nice and just, on a whim, give it to us, you know? The topic isn't broached again. I suppose we're meant to take it as a given that democracy will be able to solve all these problems that a minute ago we needed fascism to solve, even though we already know it doesn't. But the thing is, this is where their ideology leads. Let's be honest, this was never about the boys, or the other certainly talented people involved in writing and creating this show. The boys are not incompetent storytellers. The Last Airbender is incredible, but when it comes to more contemporary politics, they hit a wall. And that wall is constructed by a social and political order that says, this is it. Neoliberalism is the final form of society, and anything else, it's just an aberration. And when anything rears its head, that presumes itself to be the next stage, or to fundamentally change the system that creates these problems, by the logic of neoliberalism, it is certain to fail. As a result, we consistently write stories where revolutionaries fail, and as punishment for their failure, things get worse. Book 1 taught us that people trying to improve the world are liars. Book 2 taught us that people trying to improve the world are power-hungry. Book 3 taught us that people trying to improve the world are fools. Book 4 is a threat. If you try to make the world a better place, you will make it worse. You will bring about fascism. Stay in your place. Stay in your place. But they're only telling us this because it's what they were told. That's why their arguments are so weak. Why they fail to really grasp any of the ideologies that they tackle in works like The Legend of Korra. They're speaking someone else's words because those are the only words they know. Maybe looking back at all these lessons in what not to do when looking at politics, at the struggles going on right now in the world, maybe we can find some ways to break the cycle, to tell stories for our kids that tell them, hey, actually, maybe if you and the people around you work together, things can be better than this. Maybe our children can inherit something other than fear. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I've had a lot of fun going through The Legend of Korra and looking at the way they handle politics, and I hope you've enjoyed following along with me while we do that. To celebrate the end of this series of videos, on Saturday, December the 7th, I'm going to be streaming the entirety of The Legend of Korra video game on my new Twitch channel, all in one sitting. I don't think it's a very long game, so don't be getting too impressed about it. Following that, I'm going to be streaming regularly on Twitch in addition to the usual videos that I put out on YouTube. So thanks again to all my awesome patrons who are helping me to keep making these videos. And if you look at all those cool names on the screen there and you feel like you'd like to join them and maybe get access to some patron-only Skittles content, hit that Patreon button on the left side of the screen there. Take care.